and they want to sacrifice all of them in order to show that they're not defeated. Because you can mobilize people right and left and send them to the battlefield to be slaughtered by this Russian army. And how we can understand them?
Well, I don't try to understand comments of ignorant people. I'm more than happy to engage in a fact-based analysis of this. I will freely say that I thought when Russia made the decision to go into Ukraine that it was war. And I believe that had Russia gone to war against Ukraine, that implies all aspects of it: strategic air campaign, full-scale ground offensive operations designed to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver, that Ukraine could not stand this, that they would be done within a week. It wasn't just me that thought that. General Milley briefed Congress, the chairman of the CIA briefed Congress. This was the understanding of everybody who knew anything about Russia. But what nobody expected is that Russia wasn't running a war. They were running a special military operation that was designed to achieve a political outcome, that is to compel Ukraine through the force of arms to the negotiating table so that this war could be brought to a rapid end. Again, find me one person that said that's what Russia's doing. No one said that. And so, if I thought one thing was happening, something else was happening. It took a while to realize that. And then you adapt to it. You say, okay, this is what Russia's doing. Now, the thing about being a professional analyst is that your job is to continually evaluate what's going on. And then as new information comes in, you adapt to this new information, you come up with new assessments. So I find it sort of curious when people want to be critical. So when they see an assessment that I might make in April, they say, yeah, but back in February, you said a week. But it's April. Things move. I did this for a living, guys. I did it in wartime. I did it during the Cold War. I did it in peacetime. I did it in Iraq. The target moves. You do an assessment based upon the information you have. You try to make short-term, mid-term, and long-term, predictive analysis. Very rarely, strategically, some things are easy. Strategically, Russia was never going to lose this war. All right. And anybody who believes otherwise, just look at the game board, guys. The game went on longer than anybody thought it would, but Russia was never in danger of losing this war. What happened is that NATO and the United States committed to Ukraine to the extent that Ukraine now is in the fourth iteration of its army. Russia's won this war 4 times. They've destroyed the Ukrainian army 4 times, but we keep rebuilding it. We're at the point right now where we can't rebuild it. It's fatally crippled. There are no manpower. You're pulling kids screaming out of discotheques or ball games or whatever to go fight. What kind of motivation do they have? We're down to desperately believing that some JASSM missiles are going to change the outcome on the battlefield. It's not. Ukraine's economy is a wreck. So strategically, I've always said that Russia will win this war. Ukraine will never win this war. I think I'm right on that. In the midterm, I always said that Russia has the strategic and tactical advantage, that they're doing things right, that economically Russia is prevailing. The sanctions won't work against Russia. I think I was right on that one. That Putin will be strengthened politically because of this conflict. I think I was right on that one. That the European economy will collapse because of this conflict. I think I'm right on that one. That America will have political difficulties because of this conflict. I think I'm right on that one, guys. How am I doing so far? You see, if we reverse it, if we come at it from the other end of the spectrum. But now we come down to the tactical aspects of this. I admit, I said it would be a week. It wasn't. Why? Well, Russia didn't go to war. It was a special military operation. But what Russia did do is within 6 days of initiating this conflict, the one that you're all sitting there going, Ukraine's winning, then why did Ukraine run to the negotiating table in Gomel? Why? Because they were getting slaughtered on the battlefield. Yes, Russia made mistakes. Yes, Russian troops went in too deep, didn't have flank protection, and the Ukrainians were able to ambush certain convoys. But overall, Russia crushed the Ukrainian military, was inflicting casualties that Ukraine could not sustain, and Ukraine knew this, so they went to the negotiating table and agreed in the end of March to terms of conflict termination that met all of Russia's requirements. A victorious party doesn't concede this like they did unless they're losing on the battlefield, which they were. That's the reality of it. Then what happened? NATO and the United States made a strategic decision that they wouldn't let Ukraine collapse. And so they said, we're going to rebuild your military. And so we began the new Lend-Lease program. That's a game-changing event. Who, when the war started, again, all you geniuses out there, all you analysts out there, who said, yeah, on my bingo card, the United States is going to give Ukraine $48 billion in May. Did you really predict that? None of you did. None of you did. It took everybody by surprise. And they went, whoa, this is a game-changing event. I myself said this is a game-changing event because if they inject $48 billion into this conflict, it gives Ukraine sustainability that it didn't have. Plus, NATO provides strategic depth. Another thing I brought up now, if you want to take Ukrainians out of Ukraine and train them in Germany and France and England and elsewhere, equip them and then bring them back in,
If you own a home in Westchester County or upstate New York, you could get the latest solar panels installed at no cost. Now, I'm not saying this is free, so let me explain. The federal government recently extended the Energy Policy Act, which gives homeowners free government assistance to go solar. Not only that, but the average incentive.
Ukraine has the ability to build a military capacity that can't be touched by Russia under the current rules. Now, what Russia did while they were rebuilding is begin the offensive. They recaptured Lugansk. They made good strides into Donetsk. They moved into Kharkov. They were doing well. Battle of Mariupol. They made the land bridge. All these things that Russia did, winning, by the way. I just want to point that out. But then in the negotiation, Russia agreed to, as a good faith measure, to withdraw from Ukraine. They said, in exchange for peace on our terms, we don't want to hold on to territory. We're going to give you Kherson back. We're going to give you Zaporizhia back. We're going to withdraw from Kiev. We're going to withdraw from all these areas. That's what we agreed. And they started to do it. Then that new NATO army, the second iteration, launched an attack, took advantage of the fact that Russia had withdrawn, that Russians weren't focused on, defending against these kinds of attacks. And they had great success in Kharkov. They took the right bank of Kherson. They pushed the Russians back. And then Russia had to change the way. Again, how many people can say that you thought that in September of 2022 that Russia would do two things? One, a referendum to absorb 4 new territories into Russia. That's totally different than what Russia had talked about when they started the conflict. It's not in keeping with the Russian negotiating position that led up to the Istanbul communique of 1 April. It wasn't part of this. Russia changed things. So it's a game-changing event. You see that term, guys? You have a game-changing event. You know what happens when you have a game-changing event? You have to sort of take back and take a new assessment of what's going on. So for all the people that sit there and say, well, Ritter in the fall of 2022 is saying X, and that difference is different than what he was saying in May, because the game changed, you morons. Again, I don't understand. You're trying to score cheap political points by, making statements of the obvious. The game changed, and so professional analysts change with it. Now we had to deal with Russia mobilizing 300,000 troops. We had to deal with Russia reinvigorating their defense industry. We had to, incorporate what happens when Ukraine suffers all those losses, that 48 billion we poured in, and they all die, which they did. You don't get Kharkov and Kherson for free. You ran into a Russian defense that smothered you. So we rebuilt the army a third time. Do you guys remember this? The third time. And this one was so predictable. Why? Well, the Ukrainians made it easy. You remember the interviews allusion he gave to The Economist in December of 2022? He said, we need 12 brigades. Oh, wow, thank you there, pal. And we're going to attack, to sever the land bridge, and we're going to attack through Tokmak to Melitopol. So he just gave you the number of forces and the direction of advance. Meanwhile, we have a battle for Bakhmut taking place, which nobody predicted, not even the Russians. They didn't want it. The Ukrainians didn't want it. It was Prigozhin that that imposed this on everybody. This meat grinder operation that changed dynamic. It disrupted the Russians. It disrupted the Ukrainians in this major meat grinder. Nobody predicted that Prigozhin would go rogue. How many of you guys predicted that? I certainly didn't. I didn't predict that he'd go rogue. Was that an analytical failure? Perhaps. But that's the reality that happened there. The Ukrainians, launched their vaunted summer counteroffensive that they had predicted. Meanwhile, Russia had prepared for it, and I predicted this. I straight out said, go back in June. I said, this is exactly what's going to happen. The Ukrainians didn't make any headway. They ran into the Russian defenses, and the Russians chewed them up, spit them out, and wiped out the third army. So now we have to build a fourth army for the Ukrainians, and that's the one that's dying right now. This fourth army had certain forces, Abrams tanks, Chieftain tanks, modern Leopard tanks, all come in. They created a 20 to 30,000 strategic reserve that was held back there to keep Kiev safe. Meanwhile, on the front line, though, they didn't have too many forces. And I said, Russia is now going to get into a war of attrition and wear them down, grind them down. And Russia has been doing that. And now we had the Ukrainians commit their strategic reserves into Kursk. Nobody predicted that. You guys predicted? I didn't. I didn't see that coming. I admit it. No one saw it coming because it makes no sense. You don't sit there and go, oh, they got strategic reserve. You have a declining situation in Donetsk. Logically speaking, they're going to use the strategic reserve as a fire brigade to plug the gaps, to hold the Russians back, to buy time, to inflict more casualties on the Russians, etc. Nope. Screw the people in Donetsk. Send the strategic reserve into Kursk, where they're all going to die. Over 23,000 of them had died so far, along with hundreds of tanks and everything. Basically, they're done. In order to preserve whatever they have left, they've had to put even more reinforcements there, taking troops away from the Donetsk front, causing the collapse. So, yeah, for all you guys out there that want to pick on things, all I would ask you to do is, if you're going to criticize me based upon the predictions I made during the specific windows. But if you're going to sit there and say that, in phase 2, Ritter said this, but in phase 3, this is what happened, that's pretty dishonest and disingenuous of you. But again, it just proves that you're not really professional analysts. You're here as trolls, and you're trying to to generate a response, which you did. Congratulations. But there's the thing. Russia has won this war. Russia's not going to lose this war, and there's nothing NATO, the United States, Ukraine, or the trolls can do to change that outcome.
One of those crowns I have here fell. I put some like kind of a.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
It seems that the Zelensky administration is talking about negotiations, but it's so amazing that the Yermak is talking about we're going to negotiate, but not with Putin. With Putin, we're not, and we want to negotiate with someone else. Putin is the